It's Create Day, my friends. I've got a thrift store box that I'm going to transform with mixed media into a steampunk style valet or jewelry box. Let's get started. This is the box I'm going to use, and as you can see, that front latch is broken and I will need to remove that, but the rest of the hardware on this is in pretty good shape. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a good sanding, and then I will be removing that little front broken latch. I'm starting off with like a 80 grit sandpaper to remove that label on the top, and then I switch out to a more fine sandpaper. I think it was 220, just to clean up the rest of the box. Now I'm trying to pry off that broken latch on the front, and I was able to kind of raise it up with that putty knife and then just use my needle nose pliers to remove this little nails that were holding this in place. Once I had that all removed, I went ahead and sanded that area as well, and then gave this one light coat of shellac so that I wouldn't have bleed through when I painted it. The next day, I went ahead and grabbed my Cottage white chalk paint and gave the entire box one good coat. This is just kind of like a primer coat for everything else I'm going to be doing on this. I'm purposely trying to not paint a lot of the hardware. I don't want to gum it up with paint, but getting a little bit on there is not a problem. I just didn't want to go with the thick paint over the hardware. And I'm painting the inside bottom and the lid just so that I can do some decoupage. So now I'm showing you when this was dry, how I got a lot of crackle on there. It was actually quite beautiful. It didn't crackle over all of it. There was absolutely none on the sides or back, but I'm going with it. It just adds to the age effect. So now I'm using Tim Holtz collage paper called Typeset. I'm just going to roll it out and see what section I want to use. I'm just putting this on the top of the box. So I cut it down to size. And I'm not going to go all the way over to the edges, then sand it down. I want this to be, because there's a beveled edge around this box, so I want to have this fade into that beveled edge. So I'm taking my water pen and getting the edge of this wet so that I can rip it off and give it a really organic edge. I'm going to apply this with Mod Podge, and I like to put mine in a small little cup, add a little bit of water to it so it's not quite so thick. And I'm going to brush this on one half, then lay it down and smooth it out, and then I will do the other half. I like to use this little rubber scraper to smooth it out, but you can use anything you have that has a flat edge that will help smooth out any wrinkles and bubbles. Now once I have that on there, I just double check my edges and make sure that I didn't miss any spots and that everything's glued down. And then I go around just that outer edge with more of the Mod Podge. I will be sealing the top of this, but I don't want to do it right now when this is still wet from underneath. It would rip that tissue paper. And you can see right there, like you can still see the crackle showing through. It's pretty cool. Once that was dry, I took my Espresso Bean acrylic craft paint, and I'm going to water this down just a little bit, and then I will be using this almost like a stain. I'm going to brush this on and then wipe it back with a baby wipe. And this is also why I didn't do a coat of Mod Podge before doing this. The paint will adhere a lot better than with the Mod Podge on there. You can, and especially with this, you can tell around the edges where I did the Mod Podge, the paint does not adhere as well. Next, I go in with a color called Woodsy Smoke. I'm going to do the same thing, But with this color, I'm concentrating more around those edges that just weren't quite as accepting of the paint. And I'm going to brush this on and then wipe and kind of dab back with that baby wipe. Now to add some texture to the front of the box, I'm going to use a stencil. I believe I got this at Michael's, and I want to use that little luggage stack. I'm using chalk paste to do this. So I'm holding my stencil on there. I did put down a piece of painter's tape to help stabilize it, and I'm just going to use my little palette knife to spread the chalk paste on over this stencil. And then I just used my little palette knife to remove any little bits that had smooshed out that shouldn't be there. I let that dry, and then I added that stencil right next to it to do a couple of more of the luggage bags. And if you see on the right hand side there where the original one has dried, it's all crackled. I don't know what's causing that, but I decided to embrace it as it makes it look more aged, but I don't know what is causing that. So then I picked another stencil. It's just this kind of triangular design, and I put it on at an angle. I taped off the areas to cover the first stencils that I did, so I didn't do this over those. So I just go ahead and spread that chalk paste over this design. Then I can remove it and clean up any excess around the edges. Now I'm going to use my chalk paint in rich black to paint the interior walls of this box. I have this decoupage paper that's like old advertising, and I thought this would be a really good addition for this. So I'm just going to roughly figure out how big of a piece I need, cut it out, and then I can trim it down as needed. I chose to make it a little bit bigger and then go in after it was decoupaged in there with an X-Acto knife, or actually I used a utility knife. I just thought that would be easier, but I'm really not sure if it would be easier to maybe just go ahead and cut it to the exact size. I mean, I guess it just depends on how square your box is. But anyway, what I did was I just did it a little bit bigger than the bottom of the box and the lid of the box. And I'm just applying my Mod Podge, and then I'm going to lay this down in here. I did 1/2 at a time so I can smooth that down, just concentrate on the 1/2 and then fold that paper up and do the other half. I repeat that same process on the lid of the box, and then I leave it to dry before I go in and trim off the excess paper around those edges. Here's where I seal the top of the box. I did not use Mod Podge. I used my Select Seal matte sealer. It just gives me a more matte finish than the Mod Podge does, so that's why I chose this instead. All right, now it's time for some molds. I'm using IOD's Lock and Key collection. I'm going to add some cornstarch to this mold so that my clay will release easier. I'm using DAS air dry clay, and I'm just going to go ahead and press this in there and then use a little scraper to work from the center out to smooth off the back. I remove my casting from the mold, and then I can apply this to my box with some Gorilla wood glue. There are other glues you can use. This is what I have and it works really well, so that's why I'm using it. I'm just going to spread this glue across the entire back of the casting and then attach it to the front of that lid. And I do break out a ruler to make sure that it's pretty much centered. I just didn't trust my eye this time. I rarely measure stuff like this, but I just wanted to make sure that it was, because this glue sticks pretty quickly, and so I wanted to make sure I had it on there right. Once it was set up a little bit, but not completely dry, I went ahead and used my Espresso Bean dark brown paint to start painting on that, being gentle so that I don't distort the casting. But I just go ahead and run that paint all around that edge of the lid. I also use a baby wipe to just wipe back where the paint gets a little bit heavy in some areas, and it just helps kind of give it more of a distressed look. I'm just brushing this in around that top edge and then dabbing it back. I'm making 2 more castings from that same IOD lock and key mold, and I'm going to be placing these on either side of the box. So I get these glued on here and I need to let them set up for just a little bit before I paint them. So in the meantime, I'm going to get out my chipboard. It's a decorative steampunk wreath. I've got this little tin #1 and some wood gears that I picked up at Hobby Lobby. And the chipboard and wood gears are going to get a base coat of my Espresso Bean acrylic paint. And now since the Mod Podge is nice and dry on the inside of this box, I'm going to go ahead and use my utility knife to trim off the excess edges of that paper. And I'm sorry that I'm kind of all over the place with this video, but there's just so many steps and you're waiting for things to dry. I don't know, it's just really hard to get it organized better. So anyway, that's all I'm doing here is trimming off the excess. And then I'm going to go over those edges with another coat of Mod Podge and make sure they're down really well. And then I can seal the entire piece with the Mod Podge. And I did have a little spot there on the left-hand side that tore. So I just tore off another little piece of that paper, stuck it on there, and Mod Podged over it. And you'd never know there was ever a tear there. And just like that, we're back to painting the molds that are now glued in place and set up enough that I can paint them. And I'm going to use that same Espresso Bean paint over the molds and the rest of the box. And now back to our gears and chipboard. I'm going to be using Georgia clay and brushed bronze to add some rusty and metallic effects onto these pieces. I'm starting with Georgia clay, just brushing it around in not the whole piece, but just in different little areas. And then I go in with that same brush with the metallic bronze and kind of mix that in there, covering up parts of it, and but leaving some of the rust color still exposed. And I just work my way around the rest of this wreath, and then I do the same procedure on all the little wooden gears. To complete this look, I'm going in with Folk Arts color Patina, and I'm going to water this down, and then I can brush it on all my pieces just sparingly to add to that aged look. Now I'm going to add that same patina to the keys and to that rusty tin number 1 that I have. I'm cleaning these off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol just so I can have better adhesion of the paint. I want to use this black wax cord by the Paper Studio just to trim out the inside of that box where the decoupage paper meets the side of the box. So I'm using Fabri-Tac glue. This will dry clear and it grabs fairly quickly. I didn't feel like I would have enough working time with hot glue, and I thought it might just be a little too messy working in such a tight space. So I'm just using a little silicone spatula there that I got at the Dollar Tree to help push in those corners so that I get a nice clean fit. Once I get all the way around to the starting point, I go ahead and trim this off, making sure that I don't cut it too short, and then I can retrim it if I need to so that it will fit in there and not overlap. I repeat the same process on the lid of the box, and here's how it looks. To paint the bottom of the box, I'm using chalk paint in the color Java, and I will be doing 2 coats of this. I'm using Woodsy Smoke for the next color on my box. I'm just going to go ahead and paint this. It's not really a dry brush, but kind of. I am wiping off any excess paint off onto a paper towel, but it's not, as dry as normally you would do when you're just highlighting. But I did just want to add in a little bit of a different color. And now I'm going to go in with burnt sienna and I'm using a round brush for this. And I am doing similar thing, wiping off the excess, but I'm going to do this in random spots in a swirling motion so that I'm kind of pushing that color back down into all those little recessed areas. And this will be kind of a rusty color that just will add some more depth to this piece. Hopefully you can see here the amount of coverage I'm getting and how it's just kind of blending in to all those little areas. So I just go ahead and finish off the front, and then I add this to the sides and back of the box as well. And I'm going in now with my patina again. Same process. I'm watering it down, and I'm going to dab this on and then take a wet rag and kind of almost like a sponging motion, dabbing it back off. This is, I believe it's called ragging. And this way you're pushing that patina down into the paint, and it's removing most of it from any high points. I hope this makes sense. Like when you dry brush, you're hitting the high points with that paint, but when you do this, you're actually pushing it down in to the recessed areas, and you're removing a lot of it that gets on the high points. So again, this just adds a whole nother layer of depth and dimension. And this is where I also, with this color, I'm letting it get on the hardware, trying not to make it thick. And since it's watered down, it's, pretty easy for it to not get gummed up there. But I do want some of those colors on the hardware at this point. Now I'm taking dark brown, and I'm just going to dry brush this over the patina so that I can kind of tone down any areas that were a little bit more than I wanted, and just again add another layer of color to make this look more realistic and aged. By the way, if there's anything that I've left out that would be useful to know, just hit me up in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I realize after doing these that there's always something, oh, I was going to say this or that, that I was going to, I'm, I'm not very good at giving like alternatives if you don't have the products that I have. So just, ask me anything and I'll get back to you. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope you're finding my content useful. I'm using the matte gel medium to adhere the chipboard and the wood gears. You could use other glues. I like the way this works for a project like this. It grabs fairly quickly, but still gives me plenty of working time to move things around. And it does dry clear. I would have had a hot mess on my hands if I had used something like, hot glue for this. So that's why I chose this medium. And on the edges there, I had to wrap that around the beveled edge of the box, so I needed to add a little bit more of the gel medium and press it down. And now I'm going to do the same thing with all my little gears. I already have them laid out the way I want them to be. And the way I'm laying them out is all what are they, the spikes or whatever that come off the gears. I do make sure that they're all like connected so that they're not just all floating there by themselves. They all connect together. And here's how we're looking so far. Now to apply my tin number 1, I did start with the gel medium and held that down for a little while, but it just did not stick. So I ended up having to go back with E6000 to make this adhere to the top of the chipboard and the gears. So we're getting close to the end here. I am going to take my color called Linen and do some dry brushing around the entire box. Especially on the back, I made it just a little bit heavier because I'm going to be putting a transfer on there and I wanted it to really show up well. But for the rest of the box where I have texture and, little raised areas, I'm just kind of highlighting all of those. So I'm making sure that I keep that brush pretty dry and don't have too much paint on there. I added this also to the keys that are going on the side of the box. And then I have a couple of little embellishments. I have this travel sign that I wanted to age up a little bit. And I have a paper ticket that I want to use on the front with that travel sign. So I'm just adding a little bit on these so that they will fit in with the box. The transfer I'm using comes from IOD's Exploration booklet. These are all just lovely. I can't wait to use these on other projects. I just really like how these look. But the only one that would really fit was that little sailboat. It's like, I don't know if it's like a sailboat, but also looks kind of like a canoe. Um, anyway, I just go ahead and remove the backing, and I'm just going to place this right there in the center, and then using the transfer stick, just rub over until that transfers onto the box, and then I can burnish that down really well. And where it comes across the opening of the lid, I didn't even have to cut it. It was just fine just by opening up the lid. And now to glue our keys on, these aren't flat backed. There's a little ring around this one at the neck. And so when you lay it on here, you can see there's a gap there at the top third of it. So I'm only going to be gluing that bottom third that lays flat onto the box. And I'm using E6000, so I had absolutely no problems with, oh, and I attached the glue to that the little rim part that sticks out too. But it adhered really well. I had no issues. And now my ticket is a little bit too long for where I want to put it. So I'm going to use my tear ruler to take a little bit off the bottom and the top of the ticket. Because this is, thicker than paper, it was a little bit difficult. The bottom came off pretty easy, but on the top I ended up having to use some tweezers. Like my fingers just couldn't grab it and have enough force to actually tear it against that ruler. So I just come in with the tweezers and kind of just shred it off of there. And now we need to add some age, so I'm using Distress Oxide ink with my little blending tool in the color Vintage Photo. I'm going to go around the ticket, and then I'm also going to go around the edges of the travel sign. I'm using the gel matte medium to adhere the ticket to my box, And then I'll be using E6000 for the travel sign. And that travel sign is a Tim Holtz thing. And oh, so's the ticket. Yeah, I like the Tim Holtz stuff. So now we are going to use some clear wax and antiquing wax for the interior of our box. I'm applying the clear wax on the black painted portion, the sides of the box, the inside sides of the box, just brushing it on and wiping it off. And then I will use the antiquing wax to go around the top edge of the box on the, what's it called? So, well, you'll see. Right there. I'm painting that part antique wax. I brush that on and then wipe it back, and then that way it gives it just a much more aged and finished look. I do the same to the lid of the box as well. And then I'm taking the white wax to rub it onto that decoupage paper and kind of give it a more faded, worn look. You could do like the antiquing wax too to make it more dirty and grungy. I just went with the white wax for this. I just wanted it to look like it had just been kind of worn off a little bit. Now I'm using my Select Seal matte sealer just on the back of this box where I have the transfer. I wanted that transfer to have some protection over it, and this dries really nice and matte so it wouldn't look different than the rest of the box. And now with my ribbon buff, I'm going with the Spanish copper and the antique gold. I start with the darker one, the Spanish copper, and I'm going around all those little embellishments, the hinges, the handles, the keys, my molds, and the chipboard and gears on the top of the box. And then I use a small brush to get to those areas that I can't get to with my finger. And once I have all of that first color on, I just go back over with a little bit of the antique gold just to kind of, highlight some of those areas and make it look more authentic. I got some of that gold rubbing buff on my finger and accidentally got it on the front of the tag. And when I tried to wipe it off with a baby wipe, that's what happened. But that's okay because it just adds to the aged effect of this box. We're almost done. The final step is adding a coat of the clear wax onto the bottom of the box. With that done, we can go ahead and take a look at how this little box turned out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. But most importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.